As we talked about in the last video about him, Jack Kennedy isn't a perfect person. He has made mistakes and part of his character arc is making up for those mistakes. This is part of a good character arc, to be able to see that change and growth unless it's a stagnant character, but I digress. But it is somewhat misleading to talk about Jack Kennedy and only include our old sport, because in reality he is only half of Jack Kennedy. He is the body who was left behind after his death, who now seeks to right the wrongs done to and by him. His soul separated into a different form. Taking the look of his old doggo, Jack's soul became the one known as Shadow Doggo, a mysterious character appearing in Dayshift at Freddy's 2 and 3. It is not revealed until the end of Dayshift at Freddy's 3's Good Route that this is a character we know all too well. This is Blackjack, and he is the stray soul of Jack. He is also a major asshole. Okay, that might seem like an exaggeration, but hear me out. Take Jack's flaws, Fredbear's hypocrisy, and Henry's ego, blend it up, leave it out in the sun for a few days, and then mold it in the shape of a dog and you get Blackjack. Blackjack is selfish, unapologetically offensive, and puts himself on a pedestal above even his siblings. Blackjack's amount of self-importance is just that extreme. But let's break this down. Upon meeting with Blackjack and his introduction, he reveals that he was the one who killed Henry Miller and then trapped him down in this purgatory. And then used Peter's soul to lure the rest of the monsters down to taunt Henry with them. No, I am not kidding. Blackjack outright refers to all of them as monsters as they're standing in front of him, including his siblings, while going off about how their deaths affected him in the same breath. This is, of course, also after he refers to himself as the Savior and the Gatherer. Which you may remember from Dayshift at Freddy's 2 when he didn't do anything but whine when Jack did bad stuff. The Savior who did literally one thing and he botched that up. As Jack points out, Blackjack gave Henry immortal life. And not only did he foolishly think that Henry was going to feel remorse, which he should have figured he wouldn't, he allowed him to leak back out. It was only a matter of time before Henry just walked himself out, really. But Blackjack's self-importance makes it impossible for him to imagine this. Yes, this may be fueled by anger, but if his anger makes him this self-centered and stupid, then he should be called out on it. Remember, he and Jack are one in the same. He should have the same amount of intelligence as him. But the truth is, while Blackjack calls Jack plenty of heinous things about him being a wasted husk or whatever, he hasn't even a shred of Jack's emotional intelligence. Jack feels more than he does for other people, as proven by his tirade. Blackjack says that he intends to judge Henry and that then he'll make the decision on whether he can be forgiven, but it is all rubbish. Blackjack doesn't want to let go. He wants his own validation at any cost and he doesn't care about much else. Not enough to do anything, at least. And since we last dealt with Jack's hypocrisy, let's delve into Blackjack's, because it's much worse. Jack, at least, just has an exceptionally weird standard for forgiveness. Blackjack just put himself on a throne of his own suffering and uses it to leverage his powers against everyone else. Powers that, by the middle of fighting Henry, are revealed to be weak and useless. Blackjack is no stronger than anyone else. Dave's taking Spite out in one hit and Blackjack's doing pitiful numbers before tapping out because Henry hurt his feelings. While this happens to everyone, this is especially notable in Blackjack. He can dish it out, but he cannot take it. And if I can take a step back to Dee and Peter, he just does not care for them. He cares about their deaths, as he uses it as one of his points of self-pain, but he treats them equally to the rest of the monsters. He refers to Dee aloofly as sister and is willing to use Peter as bait without even telling him who he is. He is willing to force both of them to face their murderer for his own validation. He doesn't consider how hard it might be for them, he doesn't care. He doesn't ask them, because this is his story and this is how it's going to go. Blackjack is, in fact, a monster. And the worst part is that he doesn't really get redeemed. Yes, he is convinced that his actions are utterly foolish, but only after he gets to wallow in his pain longer. Then he lets them confront Henry, in which he barely does anything, and then, in the end, he gets to move on to a brilliant afterlife while his other half, the one who saved the day, fades away. It really is a tragedy. I think that is the main reason why Blackjack is so infuriating. We don't get to know him long, but the time we get is when he's at his worst, and it is directly followed up by us losing the character we have grown so attached to. That makes things like his foul behavior a lot harder to connect with his situation and then move on. Blackjack, like the rest of them, is a victim. He just has a massive complex that there isn't enough time to work through. He doesn't even get a speech at the end where he says something to Jack. I feel like if Blackjack had a moment at the end where he just admitted that maybe he was wrong about Jack, even if he didn't speculate how, or apologized for leaving him behind, it could have salvaged his character. All it had to be was as simple as "I'm sorry you can't come with us." That would at least show some amount of growth. Because after all he rambled off on earlier, I just don't think he cares. You can say that he learned the error of his ways when Jack unlocked his memories, but the dialogue doesn't suggest that is what happened. Jack reminded Blackjack of his suffering and how tired he was, not how his actions were going to hurt other people. Not reminding him how heartless Henry was. He validates his feelings, which, fair move on Jack's part, doesn't make the dog look better. Also, if I can be seriously petty, what is with the dog thing? Why choose to make yourself a dog, because you're ashamed of your past actions? Well, he should be. Because if what he says is true and Jack is just a husk while he's the real Jack, then he is responsible for Dee's death. Yes, Henry and Dave killed her, but Jack dumped her off at a Chuck E. Cheese, not a daycare, got sauced, forgot to pick her up, and then arrived too late to save her. Maybe that's it, and maybe that's why Blackjack holds so much contempt for Jack. Since they have divided, he can turn all his guilt into blame and settle it on Jack's shoulders. Even if he then flip-flops on Jack's individuality. Blackjack adapted another identity to separate himself from his past identity, yet snatches it back. Now I know I have been rather harsh on Blackjack through this whole ordeal, and the reason for that is largely because of how off-putting he was. I am not saying Blackjack doesn't have the right to be angry, and it certainly makes sense that he is, but his self-entitlement is not doing him any favors. Perhaps now that he's free, he can work on being a better person. Or dog. Or fade off into the void. He has that chance, unlike some people.